Okay, this video is an introduction to timpani. When you play timpani, you could play 1, you could play 2, you could play 3, you could play 4, you could play 5, you could play 6. I mean, beyond 6, I don't know that you really need it, but sometimes you do. So most commonly, though, you'll be playing with 2, 3, or 4. In this case, we have 2. I don't have a cover for this one, and I need to replace that. But when you pull out your timpani, hopefully it has a cover on it, and usually it's just a vinyl cover like this, and they usually have a cardboard disc to lay on top of the head. This is important because these heads are quite thin and they're quite expensive, so anything setting on top of it or hitting it with a stick or whatever could puncture the head, meaning that you'll have to replace it. You don't want dings in the head, and that will make the timpani sound terrible. Also, whoever used this last left the pedals in the up position. You don't want to do that. Whenever you're storing the timpani or not using it, you want to put the pedals in a down position. There. Now both drums are completely detuned. So how do we tune? You can tune using a tuner. You can tune using another instrument. You can tune using the orchestra or band that you're playing with. If you know what pitch they are playing and you know how to find that pitch, you could do that. Well, what I'm going to do in this case is I think I'm going to see if I can do a D and an A on here. Okay, so not sure how close that is to what I actually wanted, but that's the idea, is I would find the pitch, tune the drums to whatever it is I want to. As you get better at tuning timpani, you will develop an ear for it so that you can find these pitches by ear. You definitely want to practice that because it's kind of a pain in the butt to go back and forth between instruments, or if you have to tune something in a hurry, it can get very stressful if it's taking you a lot longer than you wanted to and you can get frustrated or whatever. So after you find your pitches, now you're ready to play your timpani. Now, the way I tuned it there was just me in a room by myself, but if I was playing with a group, what I might want to do is kind of gently tap the drum to hear the pitch. Or I could do it with the mallet. But you would want to be very quiet because you're not trying to interrupt the band, and if you're in the middle of a performance with the band, you don't want to, of course, generate sound that you don't want with the piece that's being played. Here's something else to think about, is if you know you're playing a timpani part where you're playing pretty loud, when you play loud, the pitch on the timpani is going to bend up. So you want to tune your timpani keeping that in mind. So if you're tuning at a soft volume and that's the perfect pitch at a soft volume, when you hit it harder, that means that perfect pitch is going to bend slightly sharp, which means you're going to be out of tune. So if you know that you're going to be playing hard and that's perfect at a soft volume, then you may want to slightly detune it so that when you hit it loud, it bends up to the correct pitch. Now, it's really easy to overanalyze this stuff. Sometimes, from lug to lug, the timpani's not in tune, so you really want to focus on what we call the fundamental pitch. So when I hit this drum, I'm fortunate that this drum is fairly in tune with itself, but if it was slightly out of tune, you'll hear some wavering in the pitch. So you want to focus on the first pitch that you hear when you hit it. And it doesn't matter what size drum you're talking about. Same principle. Okay, let's talk about beating spots on the timpani. If you play the timpani in the middle, this is what it sounds like. It sounds pretty cool, but that's not the sound that you're going for on timpani. On timpani, you want a nice resonating, vibrating sound. So as you work your way out towards the edge from the center, that's about the sweet spot on both of these. Now if I keep working towards the edge, listen to what happens. So what I always like to tell people is it's about halfway from the center to the edge, about here. And as you play, you want to feel it out. because this is an instrument that you want to vibrate, the type of stroke you want to use is what we call a legato stroke, or a freehand stroke, or a rebound stroke, or an upstroke. That kind of stroke as opposed to this. When you play with a downstroke, it actually will muffle the head a little bit, because for a minute period of time, it actually is remaining on the head a little bit and not letting the drum rebound or vibrate freely. Whereas the freehand bounces right away, just like a basketball. So, let's talk about muffling. That drum will ring for a very long time until you muffle it. So, you want to muffle using as little of your hand as possible, because you don't want to make a whole lot of noise. Notice I'm not doing this. I'm kind of very quickly rolling my fingers just to get the sound to stop. So you muffle for two reasons. One is if there's a rest. So let's say I have 3 quarter notes to play and then I want it to rest on beat 4. That's one time where you would want to muffle. Another time where you want to muffle is if you're playing in between different drums and they're all bleeding and ringing in together, but you want to have a clear sound happening. So if I'm doing this, and it's bleeding into each other, the ringing is bleeding into each other, that can sound very muddy. So here's another way to do it. So I'm muffling in between the notes that I'm playing. As soon as I hit this one, I muffle that one. As soon as I hit this one, I muffle this one. And as a rule of thumb, I think it's helpful to muffle in the same spot where you hit the drum. This is something you have to practice, just like anything else, because it's not a very intuitive thing. So let's talk about mallet choices. Obviously, if you're playing something huge and loud, you would use harder mallets. These are pretty decent mallets. It's just wood core with a little bit of felt. Now, straight up hardcore mallets. Love these for soloing, love these for percussion ensemble. If I want a slightly softer sound, I'll use that. Now, by soloing, this could be by yourself or in a group, if you have solos in a group. For most group playing, you'd probably use something like this. If you need to play really soft and not very articulate at all, poofy mallets. You can still play loud with these, it's just a different sound. The harder ones, and even harder. Okay, so one other thing that we should talk about before we finish here is the way that you're going to do a roll on timpani is not going to be the same as a snare drum. You're not going to do a double stroke roll, because you can hear the beating in the head. You're not going to do a press roll, even though the temptation's there to do that. You're not going to do a triple stroke roll. Those 3 types of rolls there actually muffle the head while also rolling. The idea behind a timpani roll is to create a wall of sound or a blanket of sound. So a single stroke roll is generally the accepted way to do this. And you're not going to play as fast as you can. You're going to have to adjust the speed of your roll per drum. So on a smaller drum with a tighter stretched head, you generally want to roll a little faster. For a bigger drum with a looser head, you want to roll a little slower. You want to find that sweet spot in the sound where it resonates perfectly. And this same rolling principle applies to all the other instruments that are similar in nature to this, like the marimba. The marimba has bigger keys, so roll slower on those. Smaller keys roll faster on those.